Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Rudy Rivera. Today, I am thrilled to have three outstanding professional recruiters to talk about what are the secrets to dealing with an executive recruiter, both at the job level and at the board level. My guests are Debbie Tang. She's a partner with Bridge Partner. Debbie leads the global executive searches in both the private and public sector, from Fortune 100 companies to universities, nonprofits, and governmental agencies. She recruits diverse executives across all functions, including CEO, CFO, and her talents go on and on. For the sake of brevity, we'll stop there. And Debbie, you can tell us a little bit more about it yourself. Amber Shockey is with Major Lindsay Africa. She is a recognized expert in legal and compliance search for corporations and private equity firms. Corporate clients, equity clients call her because she's the business partner they trust to advise on getting them the right person. She's very thoughtful, organized, and is very well sought after, just like Debbie is. And we have Heather Wolf, who is a partner with TreeStar. Heather has spent nearly 2 decades working with corporate directors to increase board diversity and enhance board performance. This includes 5 years as a recruiter, specializing in the placement of corporate directors, as well as a long-time role in developing governance for the Financial Times. Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. What I want to start with is just let's define what the recruiter is. I think people kind of often confuse what they do. And often, who do they work for? They work for me, or do they work for the company? So I'll start with you, Amber. Tell me, what is the recruiter? What is the role of the recruiter?
Thank you, Rudy. The recruiter is hired by a corporation or a private equity firm to assist it in a key search. Technically, the corporation and or the private equity firm is our client because they are paying for our fee. However, we see our relationship as two-sided, both with the corporation and with the candidates, because our role is really to find the right fit for both the candidate and the client, so that we are helping facilitate a long-term hire and not a short-term need. So we're really exploring a lot of avenues beyond just what's on the paper to get that long-term accurate hire.
And Debbie, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add that Heather, Amber, and I are all retained search professionals. And that's an important distinction to make, because I think that for lower level positions, and sometimes even C-suite, it happens, people use contingent search firms. And with a contingent search firm, one client, whether it be for-profit, nonprofit, governmental agency, will sometimes go to maybe 5 or 6 different firms. Or is there an echo? Okay, sorry, I heard myself. So maybe they'll go to 5 or 6 different firms, and the way that things work is sort of whoever submits the winner gets paid, right? So that's why they call it a contingent search. And so with those types of searches, a lot of times you don't get to know the candidates as well. You don't get to know the clients as well. But for the 3 of us, that's not the type of search we do. And so that is a big distinction in understanding that candidates need to know, because I think a lot of times people say, oh my gosh, Debbie, I love you. You're great. You're my recruiter. I'm like, well, I wish it worked that way. If there is a search that I'm working on that we can partner together and you're the right candidate, and that's great, but that it doesn't always work out like that, right? And that's more the contingent model, where potentially somebody would represent just the candidate themselves and try to, present them to a lot of different clients.
Heather, it's a little bit different at the board level, right?
Most of everything Amber and Debbie said, I can echo entirely. As was noted, we are at TreeStar, my firm. We are also exclusively a retained search firm. I'll just add one little twist, and that is what we do on occasion. It's not our mainstay, but we do something called a reverse search. And this will happen when, typically when we have a client for whom we've already done a placement and they've gotten to know us and like us, and they really want one of their key executives to serve on a board. And so I'm putting this out there in case anyone in the audience says, maybe I should ask my CEO if we can hire someone to do a reverse search for me. Now, why would a CEO, for example, a CEO, him or herself, might want to be on a board and hire a firm to help with that process, but also the succession plan, could be missing one piece, right? The executive that just hasn't done the board piece yet, and therefore it's almost part of CEO finishing school, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the one instance where I'd say we do work for the candidates to a larger degree, but 95% of the time, you really are retained by a firm that considers you theirs.
I remember a long time ago, I was contacted by a firm that said, you pay me and I'll find you a job. And then what they tried to do is they tried to down the search firms retained from by the company to get an employee. But they're saying, no, you pay us and you work for us. And by the way, give us $10,000 and we'll get you a job. I didn't quite trust it, but I know there's some of those out there. But the bulk of the recruiters are basically working for the companies. Very few will be working for the individual. Is that a fair statement?
I think especially at the executive level, nobody's trying to hire their CEO like that. It just wouldn't happen. And so,
well,
I'd like to speak to the lower levels as well, because that's where the real risk is, where candidates need to understand that corporations oftentimes have approval to have a search budget or not. And once a recruiter tries to submit a candidate and then try to be paid for it, the company can't hire that candidate if they don't have approval to pay a search firm fee. So it almost makes the candidate have a harder time with a job search because they've been submitted to a bunch of companies without prior authorization, and companies or law firms just would not want to get in the middle of a recruiter battle.
Well, I think you two, well, you three, have a difficult task because you have to sort through all the candidates. And at the same time, you don't always get clarity from the company as to what they're looking for necessarily. I don't know how often it happens to you, but I've got some other friends who are recruiters and they'll say, yeah, the company doesn't always know what they want or what they're looking for. So sometimes I have to guide them. Is this really the person you want? Or have you looked at these other type of attributes? What's your thought on that? Start with you, Debbie, and then go to Heather.
I will say that we have had searches even at the C level where things pivot. Things happen at the company in the duration of the search, and what was once important is no longer important, or what was once not important becomes important, right? And so that is something that as a search professional, we do need to, yes, guide our clients, but at the same time, we also have to be flexible, adaptable, pivot, and roll with the punches, because very often, you give them a slate of candidates that fit the marks that they gave you, but then they change the marks, right? And so sometimes we do encourage our clients, start meeting people, because sometimes it's actually after you start meeting the candidates that certain things start to crystallize and become more real. When they're being presented in a real candidate in person, they say, oh, wow, I didn't realize how much I needed that skill set, right?
I think that's an important part, is figuring out what skills, because there are skills that I won't say you're born with, but there's skills that you acquire through just living. And then there's the job skills. I know that when I came into my current job, I knew nothing about title insurance, but I had a lot of experience in Latin America. That's what was more important to them, not title insurance. We can teach you that. So I think sometimes some people are very narrow about, no, it's got to be this, and not necessarily taking into account what other people are doing. Heather, what's your thought on that?
We do spend a lot of time up front talking about the spec and pushing and pulling on it and stretching it and challenging it. Because whilst sometimes you do have to have some real life modeling, as in, introduce candidates, you don't want to do too much of that, because then you have a lot of disappointed candidates, and, can start to give them the sense of, does the client not know what they're looking for, or does the search firm not know their client very well? So we really do invest quite heavily up front. Now, what you can't know quite as well is more the cultural fit side, the interpersonal side. And sometimes somebody who's perfectly qualified on paper and checks all your bullet points, will be a flop in the interview because there just wasn't the right chemistry or the right feel. That you can try to vet for as you meet candidates prior to introducing them to your clients, but you don't always get that exactly right. But having said that, I can name 2 instances right off the top of my head this year where, as Debbie mentioned, we did about a 180 pivot because a circumstance changed. And we were a fair ways down the track with one spec, and a key executive left. And so, guess what? It's all it's another spec now. So that absolutely can happen. But I don't think it negates the time spent up front, really trying to understand what you're looking for before you head out into the, cold blue yonder.
Amber, what's your thought on that?
I couldn't agree more with Debbie and Heather, and I've experienced the similar pivots, and I do find myself to be a good recruiter because I'm flexible and adaptable, as Debbie mentioned. One thing that I try to do is get our clients to prioritize, because our job spec oftentimes has a large number of bullets, and what candidates want to hear from an executive search professional is what are the priorities in this role? And so I try to frame everything within priorities, and that's really where things can sometimes shift because of changing priorities. But oftentimes a client might meet a candidate and maybe the strongest priority gets devalued for a variety of other reasons. So I almost look at it a little bit more like a sliding scale rather than a pure pivot in some situations. We've had the pure pivots too.
Have you ever worked with a psychologist? The reason I ask this question is because one of my own clients is not a clinical psychologist, but a practicing psychologist, and she'll work with recruiters. And they will do an analysis and evaluation, not just of the candidate, but the work culture. So there may be 4, and the psychologist says, this one might fit more, and this one maybe not so. They don't ever say they're bad or they're psychopaths. They just say maybe it's not a good fit, right? And the times that she said that they've not listened to her analysis, they've regretted it, or it's never worked out. How have you found working with a psychologist?
So I can start. We've had clients where usually at the executive level, sometimes direct reports to the C-suite have to go through sometimes 2 or 3 days of sort of psychological testing. And it sounds intense, and it is, right? There are certain clients where they're sort of, tell me your life story. And what they're trying to get at is we have a culture of the company, but we also have a culture of our leadership team. And they're trying to make an assessment of whether this person is going to fit in with the existing leadership team, or how they're going to fit in with the existing leadership team. And it's not always a thumbs up, thumbs down, no way, but sometimes it's also a tool for onboarding and just making sure, are we going to set this person up for success? What are the things that we need to be aware of before they join the executive team? What are the things that this executive team can do to support their new colleague, right? So there's different ways to approach the psychological testing. Some people use it a little bit more definitively, and I have seen clients ruled out, right, as a result of whatever results come out of it. But then other people use it almost as an onboarding tool. So it definitely, the psychologists come in at a lot of our clients.
You find this more common now than it was in the past? Or it's always been like that?
More like, in my experience, there's been more of a predictive testing tool that a given company will use. And it's, it's a battery of tests. That's become almost standard. Whereas Debbie describing the multi-day event, that I've seen mostly of maybe a CEO hire, a really high profile hire. But the psychometric testing is become industry standard almost. I was just going to add one other thing. It's related, but I don't want to take the conversation in a different direction. I just want to mention it. And that is the other thing that we're doing, or our clients are doing, is legal background checks. And I would just say to candidates, it's always better to tell the recruiter if there's something that could come up in your background check that could be a red flag than not to tell. I can't say how many times we've had things come up that were not nice surprises. And in some instances, the candidate simply doesn't know what's going to be dredged up, and in other cases they do. So when a recruiter asks you, now, is there anything I should know before we submit this background check? Listen carefully for the answer.
Yeah. And I'll add to that a funny story. Google yourself, because sometimes the first hit is not you. And we've had that happen with candidates, with clients, where they Google somebody and they're like, oh my God, did you know that X did this? And you're like, no, that wasn't him or her. Right. And so just being aware of what's out there under your name, even if it's not you, is also helpful, because you can kind of head things off at the pass and just say, by the way, there is a convicted felon with my name in my state, but it is not me.
Well, under the federal system, any contact with law enforcement is an arrest. And so you ask somebody, have you ever been arrested? They say, no, I was never handcuffed. But it shows up as an arrest. So I would ask my clients, I did a lot of international adoptions and the criminal records were important. I say, have you ever been stopped by a police officer? I mean, that's how I asked the question. They say, oh yeah, there was that time. And then you go into it. And also in the criminal law, I used to do drug cases because I was appointed by the court because I spoke Spanish. You always told them what happened first. If you're going to make a deal, make the deal first. Then that way you know how to deal with the surprise, right? So if Heather, somebody says, I was arrested in a bar in a drunken brawl, I was helping my brother. You may not want to talk about it, but at least you've got an opportunity to say, well, I'm sorry, that's not going to fly with this company. Or yes, I think we can get around that. They get you more for lying than telling the truth, right? So be honest. Is that your takeaway, no matter how bad it is?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I shot my brother and he's under the couch. Is that will I not be able to get a job because of that? Well, you'll be lucky you can stay out of jail, right? But I think people don't want to talk about bad stuff about them, and that's a problem. And rather than hiding themselves, they should do that. How have you found the pandemic to have affected how you do business? Because I've noticed that it seems to be an employees market where employers are saying, no, if it's not my conditions, I'm not going to work. How has that changed the way you do business, Amber?
So it was an a candidate driven market in 2020, 2021. I would say that we're on the cusp of changing. In some instances, it's a client driven market, but in other instances, it's a candidate driven market. What we saw in the pandemic is that the speed of the search dramatically accelerated. The ability to hire a full hire, even executive level hires fully over Zoom, became a reality. At this point, we're starting to see the the length of the search cycle going back all the way to 2019. We're really encouraging our clients to find somewhere in the middle, because I do think that the longer search cycles that we're beginning to see now, because clients are feeling that they have longer times to vet. It takes longer to get candidates into the office for the final interview. We are still seeing competing offers being able to come in at the very last minute. We had a Fortune 200 company fully complete a executive level general counsel search within 3 weeks, and our search process had taken several months. And right at the end, they were able to come in and make a competitive offer very quickly. So I'm hoping that we find some sort of happy medium, because the speed was too quick in 2021. It's starting to get too slow again. So I'm hoping we'll have some lessons learned and find a happy medium.
Amber, Heather, I mean, do you have a comment on that?
In terms of, as you mentioned, Rudy, my focus is primarily the boardroom, and I wouldn't say the speed probably was as varied during the pandemic. We were busy as can be, which was wonderful, but it wasn't a sort of a slow, fast thing. Right now, what we're seeing as a huge differentiator in terms of the executive searches we do, because we do a handful of those along with the board searches, and I'd be really interested in Debbie and Amber's take on this. The $1 million question is work from home, hybrid, expectations around the office. That's what I've seen mostly change, as candidates have a very clear idea of how they now want to work, and clients are becoming clear on that too. So that's another area where you really have to make a match, where they have the same approach to work lifestyle.
And that's the thing too, is that sometimes these things change. Somebody will be hired and they will say, okay, you can be remote most of the time. And then if everyone gets called back in, that includes the executives sometimes too, right? And so that is something that candidates have to have a little bit more flexibility with, and they did. It is true, I think, during the pandemic and still to this day, the first questions, is it remote? Is it hybrid? Whereas the old question used to be, what's the comp, right? And so that has changed dramatically. And just what Amber was saying about timeline and fast search, slow search, I think the difference maker has been, and probably Heather, you've seen this too with your board searches, because of board meetings, everything going online. It changes a lot. Scheduling can be like a little bit more compact than before. And so you've got boards who are making decisions via Zoom about whether they want to bring on somebody to be your new fellow director, right? And then you've got sometimes C-suite members interviewing their next CFO on Zoom. And so I think that there will be, going into the future, there will still be an element of that, but I've already seen, just in terms of our clients, definitely much more of an in-person approach. Just within, I would say like the last 6 months, like this year, I've had way more in-person meetings than I did in the pandemic times.
Amber, how has the pandemic affected you in this world?
I've definitely seen and gotten the same questions as Debbie and Heather. We have a little snapshot on our position description that includes location, compensation, a quick skills overview. We added a work model section. So we're asking these questions as part of our onboarding for a search. I think that we are also going to find a happy medium here. And like Debbie, I would almost warn people to understand that if they take a fully remote role, and that is not where the majority of the employees are, there is a risk that the company can take back their agreement to let you work remote. I also have started asking candidates if it is a fully remote role, to really talk about in the interview process, what is the company's experience with onboarding fully remote employees? Because we are seeing a much larger percentage of candidates that are in fully remote roles. We were really looking at this in 2020 and 2021, changing jobs sooner than normal. And I do think that a lot of it is the disconnectivity of the fully remote role. So I do think some sort of hybrid. We have several clients pushing for 4 days a week. I had one that pushed for 5, and I managed to complete the search, but it was complicated. I encouraged them not to do it, but
You'll lose so many people on.
Yes, the CEO had a very strong opinion. 5 days a week is almost unheard of, but 4 is becoming the new 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rudy, there's a question in the Q&A. I didn't know if you wanted to wait until.
It's a good question. And I encourage anybody to ask questions. It's I'm looking at it now. In your experience, does intuition become a factor that influences your suggestions for hiring an executive? Intuition, your gut feeling. Whoever wants to handle that question first.
I'll take it just real quickly, because I actually encourage my candidates to follow their intuition on what is right for them. However, I feel that we are more in a non-intuitive role, and we should be making it easy for the client and the candidate to follow their own intuition. And I don't think that my intuition should play into the process, but that's my own opinion. Debbie and Heather, I'd be curious how you consider this question.
Yeah. So when I hear the word intuition, it kind of reminds me of, in some ways, unconscious bias and bias, right? And so we are in a minority-owned executive search firm, and we want to make every search as inclusive as possible. And so we have 2 partners on every search, and part of that is to get rid of just the gut reaction. Because you want to just have different data points that you're looking at. You want some of it to be pretty objective, right? In terms of how we're evaluating people, and also in trying to make as inclusive a search as possible. And by starting out with as big of a pool as we can, if we just relied on intuition, I think that a lot of times you would be cutting out very talented people that probably deserve a chance and a second look and more evaluation. And so for us, I would say we try to temper intuition as best we can.
Heather, what's your thought on that?
That's a good, that's a good one for me to digest. You know, it's funny when we start a new search and we get excited about a spec, and, you know, and my colleagues and I, who've been around boards and directors for a really long time. I mean, in my case, like 2 decades, and you've got this kind of Rolodex going in your head the whole time. And we'll start peppering and popcorning candidate ideas. And from, you know, call it intuition, or call it just the experience, or the benefit of a lot of years and a lot of experience. That said, we also have a technique for making sure we're never just recycling or reusing, if you will, our old faithfuls. We make sure that for every single search, there are 3 components. Yes, these people we know in our database that come straight to mind. We always do blue sky research. We don't presuppose everyone in our, you know, that is a great possibility is in our database. So we'll always find ways to add and cast a wider and wider net. And then we also think about the people whom we can source from. So, you know, people who know the industry, know the topics that are of the greatest concern, whatever it might be, and we list them and know where the shining stars are hidden that we haven't met yet. So we source, we do use our database, and we do blue sky. That's kind of our way to not let over-index on intuition, if you will.
What is blue sky? What do you mean by blue sky?
Just meaning
brand new research.
Brand new,
brand new research.
Primary research.
Well, how important is social media now? as a source for you?
I don't know if social media is a source, but it's more along the lines of what Heather was saying about background checks and other checks. We have clients that have us do social media checks too, along, academic checks, criminal checks, credit checks, social media checks. And so just like I said, Google yourself, in terms of Instagram, all kinds of other, apps, know what you're putting out there, because if there are things that are contrary to what this client wants represented, then you're very likely not going to be receiving that offer.
And that's a very important almost takeaway for our listeners, because whatever you do on social media is going to stay there.
Mhm.
You may take down a website, but somebody may have copied it, onto their computer. And I was talking to somebody today who there's a service called Wayback, where you can go on a website and then it'll take you back through the history of the website to the way it was prior.
Mhm.
Almost like what you can do on Google Earth,
Right.
and go back to before the building was built. So it's pretty scary, and you've got to be careful, right? So one piece of advice is be careful what you post, because that's going to affect it.
I'd say a big takeaway for this audience is probably dead obvious, but I think LinkedIn has outsized importance in the whole recruiting ecosystem at this stage. Candidates use it, clients use it, recruiters
Mhm.
use it. LinkedIn.
I think that's the only, in my mind, it's the only real serious medium. I have Facebook I only use when I am looking for witnesses for cases, when I'm doing my investigation, but I never post. And I must have like 200 friend requests on Facebook that I've never accepted. So I think it's extremely important. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. How much is a lack of social media presence or engagement considered? If nobody has a social footprint, is that a negative thing?
So I will say that if you have a lack of social media presence, that's fine. I don't need everybody to be on LinkedIn. In terms of how we vet our candidates, it's not just LinkedIn, right? And so if there were to be an executive that's not on any social, I wouldn't put them in any lower stead than somebody who's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of the things. It's just not for most clients. It depends on the role, it depends on the client, but most of them do not need their executives to have a social media presence.
I know some high-level executives who have no social media presence because they don't want to be tied to something that can be used against them
Right.
down the road. So it can be a double-edged sword.
Yes.
Where they
I
have
think
it, but
so.
the PR firm manages it. And does all the posts.
Yeah. There's a PR firm that says that's why firms have crisis managers,
Right.
public relations people, and now social media people, which is all part of the same process. Amber, what's your thought on that?
I have not encountered a client that had an issue with lack of social media presence. I also am trying to think of a candidate that has, I don't think I can think of a candidate that hasn't at least had an inactive LinkedIn account with no picture, but at least their basic information.
See, I think it's important, but maybe not so much that somebody's going to hire you for that, but it's important because you have to network. And networking is how you develop these relationships that can, say, lead you to Amber, lead you to Heather or Debbie to say, hey, I'm a potential candidate. So it's important for that aspect of it. So how important is networking for people in this thing? Somebody calls you out of the blue and say, hey, Heather, guess what? I think I'm the smartest guy in the world, and I don't know why a company wouldn't want me, but it could be a cold call, right? But if there are a lot of people who
everyone thinks they belong on a board.
I know, but if you're networked and you've got other resources that you can talk to people about. To me, that's what I think the value of the social media is. Not so much that they're going to look at it and say, oh, we're hiring him or not hiring him because of that. It's just a vehicle to get you to where you might want to be, I think.
Yes,
I
I mean,
think-
I think that LinkedIn can be helpful for people, right?
Mhm.
Because Rudy, you could say, hey, my colleague that I worked with however many years ago is interested in your job, Debbie. And I only know this because you reached out to me on LinkedIn and told me that. That is the good use of that person's network, right? Saying to you, Rudy, talk to Debbie for me, right? But
Mhm.
I will say that every recruiter has a very different perspective on how they want to be reached out to. And everyone has their own preferences. And it's definitely not one size fits all, because I have been on many panels like this one with other fellow executive search professionals. And there are plenty of people who will say, never call me. I don't want to hear from you. I will find you when I need you. That's not my ethos. That's not what I subscribe to, but I have heard many recruiters, and especially sometimes the larger firms, they've got too much on their plate. They've got too many searches going on. They're not going to even respond. They're not going to reply to the person who leaves a voicemail and says, I'm great, call me back, or sends an email saying, here's my board resume, Heather. I can't wait for you to put me on a board.
Yeah.
You have to know that's why it's important to actually develop a relationship with recruiters rather than just sort of peppering hundreds of recruiters with your info. You've got to make sure that you are cultivating a long-lasting relationship. It's not necessarily, I'm going to be able to help you tomorrow and I've got the perfect CFO search for you and you're the right candidate. It's more about, over the years, I've seen your career develop. I've seen the type of companies that you've been working at. And now I've got that company that I think is your perfect next step, right? It's about the long term.
One of my good friends who's a GC, Association of Corporate Counsel colleagues, says, make friends with a recruiter. They may not
It doesn't
be your best
hurt.
friends.
It doesn't
but
hurt.
It doesn't hurt to make friends with a recruiter. No, you're all going to get invitations. You're going to say, you want to be my friend, right? But I think it's important because people want to do business with people they like. And if you're somebody that you have something in common with, you make the connection, they're present in your mind, right? And you'll think about them. Looking at it from a different point of view, I've had friends who've been called by recruiters. Now, there are some recruiters that deal at the very high level, and there's some that have to make their number. So they're constantly calling. And what happened to me once and happened to some other people is you get a call. I saw your profile on LinkedIn. You look great. And then after a 10-minute talk, you're not a match for the job. Well, what changed between the time you saw my LinkedIn profile and that? So I think you have to be wary whether you're dealing with a junior recruiter who has to meet numbers or one that's well seasoned. I think it's a good question to ask. What's your thought on it? Debbie, what do you think? You got that smile like that.
Yeah. So I was going to say a lot of times when people are trying to make numbers, that's not usually for executive search, right? That's not usually for the C-suite.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, it just doesn't apply as much. But I think that maybe for like a lower level search, or if someone's trying to make numbers, it's usually the other way around. Like if they're trying to make numbers, they're trying to cold call as many companies as they can to try to draw business in, something like that. I don't think you usually, no, because I've never had that job, but I don't think you get credit for calling 50 candidates. Maybe for contingent search. I don't know. Do either of you ladies know? It's just not my world.
Not for contingent search either. So my guess is in the scenario that you were laying out, Rudy, is that you had a recruiter that was maybe not taking enough time to really research the right person, and they were just sending out a whole bunch of emails quickly without really reading. There's also times where I cast a little bit wider of a net, like maybe a little bit more senior or a little less experience than what we've been asked for, to just to make sure we don't miss somebody that that should be considered. Or if a LinkedIn profile has no information about exactly what their skill set is, but we know that they're at a company in the similar industry, sometimes I'll just check it out to see if there's somebody there that if this person could fit. And I think that might be what was experienced in this situation. I'm not sure.
I think it's like all the above. I mean, like you have lawyers that are great, you have some lawyers that are not so good. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And it's sad in every field. But I think for the most part, if you are talking to a recruiter, those are questions you need to ask. What level are you working for? You know, if you're looking to hire a recruiter, you know, what's their point of view, and make sure you have a good conversation with them about your job, what you want. Because I've had to use recruiters for, you know, job place, you know, when I've hired people, and I've had great success with most of them. So it's a give and take, though. You know, you got to be able to communicate and each know what the other wants, you know. But I agree that you can't just throw out the net and pick everybody, because you don't have enough time in the day, right? And you have to find some way to narrow it.
Here's one the audience might be interested in thinking about. We often encourage boards to think about adding younger people to their board, and by younger I mean, you know, like in their 40s, and which is considered quite young.
That's young for me. Trust me. I hung out with Jesus when I was in college.
So as a recruiter, when you're going out to meet these younger people, and often they have very needed and relevant skills in certain aspects of technology and cybersecurity, maybe in artificial intelligence. I'm, you know, not always, but, you know, those are often the roles for which we're most interested in somebody who's closer to a digital native, to join a board and, you know, make a contribution that's not currently being made around the board table. But you always have to look at these people with the full board responsibility in mind. So they may be whiz-bang tech people, cutting-edge cyber people, you know, on the forefront of artificial intelligence, et cetera. But if they only can talk about that and don't have the ability to contribute right across the agenda on other aspects of strategy and risk and human capital and so forth, you know, then you kind of have to gracefully back out the door and say, thank you, it was so great to meet you. I don't think it's a fit. And, you know, it's not because of the functional attributes, but rather, you know, the breadth and maybe the gravitas to really fit into a boardroom as a, you know, 30 or 40-year-old, not because they're 30 or 40 years old, but because they just haven't walked the road as long as so many of the board members have, in terms of business cycles that they've seen and lived through and those sorts of attributes. So those are the times when it can come as a surprise when somebody gets really excited, you know, about a potential board role, and then you kind of have to say, thanks, I'll see you in a few years.
We have a very interesting question, and that is, how much are you seeing clients express interest in co-executive leadership models?
Like co-CEO, co-presidents, that kind of.
I'll ask the person who asked the question. Is that what you mean? Co-CEOs, co-directors, Yes. Co-CEOs, co-directors. Have you ever seen that?
I've seen it, but I still think it's rare.
It's usually an accommodation for a merger situation, or I think, rather than designed to be long-term. That's at least what I've experienced.
I've never seen co-CEOs. Oftentimes what you'll see is a CEO and a chairman of the board, and they're doing stuff together, but they're different roles, right? Different roles in the company, but they interact. That's probably the closest thing to co, I think, that we would get. as I told you earlier, time is going to go fast on this thing, and the time is really going fast. So I want to talk about, what advice would you give to people looking for a job? Okay. And then what advice would you give to somebody who's going to hire you to find somebody? I've looked at some things on the internet. Some of it is don't be a pest and keep calling. Okay. One of the things you said, Heather, is, be honest. Okay. Just lay it all out, because if not, you're wasting their time and your time, right? Or they're wasting your time. Understand what the job is about. Okay. And you, as the candidate, have reasonable expectations of what you can really do. Oftentimes we place ourselves in the Superman role, that we can do anything. Like you're the winning quarterback throwing the 100-yard pass, but you're also the tight end catching it. We all think we're great. What is some advice you give first to the job searchers?
So I'll start with the job searcher advice. I think one of the things is to just be authentic. And I know that it's a little bit trite, but the reason why I say this is because as the job search goes on, I think that sometimes people make sacrifices and compromises, and I don't think that that's always wise. And so what I mean by that is, if you are interviewing at a company and you feel like the culture is not necessarily a natural fit to how you do business, to how you work, to your values, sometimes people will try to sort of be something that they're not for interviews because they want to win. And I think that that's a big mistake. And so I say be authentic, because I'd rather you go into the interviews with who you are so they can make an evaluation on if that's a good fit. Because I think that the alternative is that, okay, great, you fooled them into thinking, maybe you're super aggressive because the rest of the C-suite has that demeanor. And then if you are with these people day in and day out, it's a really exhausting way to work, right? In terms of you can't keep it up for that long. So that's why I say be authentic. And the other thing that I'll say, kind of going along with this and helping you be authentic, is to ask the tough questions, even though you are a job seeker, is because a lot of times candidates will say, oh, but it's fine. It's okay. I'm okay with that. But are you really okay with it? You have to be able to, in the interview process, get the answers that you need to know whether this is the right job for you, this is the right company for you, if you can be successful there. Because I do think sometimes candidates just want to show their best sides, and they sometimes avoid the tough questions because they don't want to be seen as, like a troublemaker or whatever the case is. But I always tell candidates it's a two-way street, right? They're going to ask you very tough questions, but if they can't give you answers to your tough questions, is that where you want to be?
I agree. Management styles change from company to company. Some are more draconian and aggressive. Some really care about the culture of the workforce. Amber, what do you have to add to that?
So the points that Debbie just made are my favorites and my top points. As maybe a third suggestion, I would suggest that candidates should recognize that there is still some element of us having to match skills and clients wanting to match skills to the blind sides in their organization that's resulting in the search. And I oftentimes get candidates that feel like they can learn new skills, which is great, because every single job has some element of somebody wanting to broaden their skill set and not do the exact same job. And we understand that. But I really like it when candidates first tie what they can do to what the company is looking for, and then identify where their areas of growth are and how their learning curve might be shortened for those extra areas of growth. I really appreciate it when I feel the candidate is working with us. I also think I hear a lot of candidates, and this is almost kind of an expansion on Debbie's second point, but I do see candidates waiting until the very end to share what their compensation expectations are, or to tell us that they're interested in the job, but they're not that interested in the job, or there might be another job that they're interviewing for that's more interesting, even though we've been asking all of these questions throughout the process. And I just think open communication throughout the process is so appreciated. And I would almost say that the three of us on this call, and it might be because we're retained search, we're here to help you, and we'll guide you. We'll tell you this might be a really big issue. We should probably raise it with the client this way, or we'll help you work through some of those challenges. But we need to know what they are, because our clients don't like surprises, and
We don't either.
that's piece of advice, and we don't either. I like them less than my clients.
Well, I think the money is an important thing at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
because if they're not going to pay you what you think you're worth, you've wasted this whole interview process.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And you might as well spend time on something that's going to be more lucrative. Heather, what do you have to add?
I'll come back to the money question in a minute. One of the ways I like to think of phrasing what Debbie and Amber have said in a couple of different ways is, don't be that know-it-all. No one knows everything. No one's done everything. And don't feel like just because you're in an interview situation, you have to become this superwoman. And so a colleague told me a long time ago, and I love this, everyone has their majors and their minors, right? Like, you went to college and you had your major, and that's what you really, really know. You can take that to the mat. And then you've got a few minors, stuff that you've done along the way that you had a new and interesting experience. So maybe your major is, brand marketing. And then, you got really into digital marketing. And then as a result of digital marketing, you got to know much more about cybersecurity because there was a big element. Fine. But don't keep going. Just figure out what your major is, your couple, three minors, and then be really candid about what would be, where you'd be on a learning curve for some of the other areas. And, if you love being on a learning curve, talk about that, but don't act like you've done it all.
But don't you think,
financially, it's so interesting how different people value money differently. So for some, it has primary importance. And for others, if they love the company, they love the mission, they love the CEO, they love the team, they would do it for next to nothing. Exaggerating, of course. But I mean, you also, so maybe appetite, or, you have to kind of calibrate the person's attitude towards the compensation. And I know it can be difficult because they can say at the end of the day, yeah, I know I said it wasn't that important, but this really isn't enough, and walk away. Well, that's awful. But I think you can get there, in the conversation, to really try to peel back the onion in terms of how important, how much of a make or break the right comp will be.
what you say resonates with me? Although I'm not an executive search professional, I do hire lawyers all over the world. And they do the same beauty pageant dance, with me as to why I should hire them. They might do with an employer. And my criteria is, and I'm very strong about this, I'm not looking for the smartest guy in the room. I am looking for the person who will work the hardest, and there's some humility to them. And I can work with that, because like one of my best lawyers is actually a person who's been out of the marketplace for 25 years. And when I hired that person, they said, "Oh God, you sure you want to hire me? Because, trust me, you've got other skills." And turns out to be one of my best lawyers. So people can surprise you, but I think for me, that's what's important for me. I don't know how you feel about that as recruiters, but that's my thing. I think people who think they're way too smart end up making mistakes.
Rudy, I love that you used the word humility, because I think that is one of the things, it's sort of the opposite side of the coin of executive presence and gravitas, which we hear about
Mhm.
all of the time when it comes to executives. The other side of the coin is humility and actually knowing your weaknesses, knowing where you can improve. Because that's another piece of advice I think for candidates is so often you're so focused on your majors, your minors, all the things you can do. People can't talk about their failures in a way that is, concise, that is shows humility. And that is a huge, I think, blind spot for a lot of executives is that they're always focused on what I can do. And then when they're asked to talk about failures, they just clam up or they talk about it in a way that is really trite or just really fake and artificial. And so I like that you use the word humility because that's something that I think that for almost all of our clients, doesn't matter if it's CEO or a board member, people have to be able to understand that they're not 100% everything.
Or they blame somebody else for their failures.
Yes.
They don't fess up to their failures. I got asked once in a job interview what I thought my greatest failure was. And I
It's a
thought,
great
boy,
question.
I thought it was a stupid question.
No,
But
it tells a lot.
What do I know? And I did say some things that I thought, well, this is what I could have done better, but it was an interview over a lunch that I didn't think was going to be an interview. So I wasn't ready for it. What's this about? But I didn't want to work there anyway. But that was the question you get a lot, what's your failure? And I think if you could say with some humility what it is, it just makes you a genuine person. Yeah, I think people, when you talk about money, Heather, I agree with you that the workplace is important. Could you get more money someplace else? But the question is, are you going to be happier there? There's a company that I thought at one point I wanted to work with, and I thought, oh my God, it's ideal. And I thought, oh, after I talked to people, there's no way. And there's no way I'm ever working there, So I think as a candidate, you need to be happy, look at where you're at now. And are you really that unhappy? You know what I'm saying? And be careful of what you want because you might get it. Okay? That's the issue. I would say that we can close with this. What are your biggest challenges as a recruiter on the client side or the employer side when they're hiring you? What are some of the biggest challenges you face when you're talking to a Fortune 500 company and they say, I want this type of person? We've talked about challenges with individuals. Now, what are some of the challenges with the companies? Anyone want to go first? Amber?
I think everybody is probably thinking the same thing, just educating the client on the market conditions because clients oftentimes know what they want and what they pay and what their other executives pay and how the role needs to be organized for that organization, but they don't have a whole lot of visibility into the market overall and what is the talent pool going to look like. So just that's the place that we spend the most of our time with our clients at the beginning of the search.
So these are my takeaways based on this conversation. And you can tell me if you agree or not. The first one is to be humble and be genuine, because you can't put up a front all the time. And even if you can get the job because you put up this front, you can't keep it up for the whole time. Number two is be honest about what your expectations are. It may not be a good fit, so don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, but that's not for me. Right. Three, be honest about the money, what you want. In other words, decide for yourself, is the money important or is the work environment important? Because there's also the possibility of going into a company, not because that's the role you want, but you can work up to another role because it's the type of company you work for, right? And the other one is listen. We often spend too much time talking and not listening. So I can imagine you've had interviews where people are rambling on how good they are and not really listening.
We have.
Yes, there's definitely people who have talking points that they're trying to hit every single one within your 1 hour interview, even if it's completely irrelevant to the question that you've asked.
Yes.
Exactly.
We do have one interview question where we say, give us a 5-minute overview of your career and what's been important. And there are some people that will go on for 30 or 40 minutes without even breathing. So, yes.
As a joke, when people said, tell us something about yourself, I'd say, my name is Rudy. Just ask me what you want to know.
It's a good one.
Well, thank you. We are about the end of our time. I am going to sign off now to our actually LinkedIn live audience. I'm going to stop the live stream. I want to thank everybody for appearing. It was just a fantastic conversation. And I'm so grateful to you, Amber, Debbie, and Heather for doing this on your free time on a Thursday night, Wednesday night, or Tuesday night. I'm losing track of time because I'm ping-ponging. Let me stop that, and I will stop the recording. Don't forget, you are watching Conversations with Rudy Rivera.